Excellent. Well, welcome everyone to our ITE Forum series. And I'm delighted to say we have the second part of our discussion on hearing the learner today with contributions, our chairs, co-chair Conor Galvin from UCD and University College Dublin in Ireland, and Peter Claxton, who's a senior strategy manager at Smart Technologies. And today we're joined by Ellie Marie and Kirsten from the University of Agder. Now, for those of you that are familiar with the project, and for those that you aren't, I always show this slide just to summarise where we are in the project at the start of every meeting, and also for anyone new to the meeting, if you'd like to join us in any of the activities, you are very, very welcome. So we have three strands in the project overall. The first is a knowledge exchange, which is the ITE Forum that we've got today, with the launch, which includes the student voice, and it's linked very closely to the Future Classroom Lab at European SchoolNet. The second strand is all around the co-design between the universities and the industry partners of innovative content and piloting. And we have had our 2018 pilots, worked with the students, the universities and the industry partners to take on board the evaluation and co-design the second set of materials, which we're piloting now within the modules. And we have a student-teacher MOOC running as well. And then we will build from that learning again and follow into the autumn. So if you're interested at all in pilots and you are new to the project, please just get in touch with us. You'd be very welcome to join observing or thinking, how can you apply this in your organisation? And the third strand is a monitoring strand, which we do monitor the research in this area, deliver case studies, and also this year, led by our colleagues, University of Agder, we are doing work in the whole area of the digital competences, pedagogical competence of the teacher educators themselves, i.e. the lecturers within the universities. A very interesting angle there as well to add to the research. So I'd like to now hand over. Our agenda for today, as I say, is on the screen. I'm going to hand over to Conor now, Conor, and be quiet, but in the background looking at the chat line, and also I can switch the video on as I did before, Conor, once you're ready. Okay? Thank you.
Okay, that's terrific, Dorothy. Thank you very much indeed. Good afternoon, colleagues. It's a pleasure to see so many familiar faces and also to see some new names in our list again today. So I'm looking forward to the conversation. We had a very interesting talk the last time out, but I think we finished on a note that was not quite where we wanted to be, and we thought maybe we should return to this topic and continue the conversation for one more session rather than moving on to the next topic in the series. So Dorothy has very kindly facilitated that, and I'm very pleased to say that Peter is also back to co-chair in relation to this. Peter, would you like to chip in at this stage, or do you want to wait another while?
No, I just echo your comments that it's a good opportunity to listen, to reflect, and to think about how the information we shared may apply in your particular setting. So no, looking forward to the input from the people on the calls and sharing a little bit more about what we call the voice of the customer. We might call it the voice of the student here, who is the ultimate customer. So back to yourself.
Okay, thanks, Peter. That's very good. So just to kind of summarize very briefly where we left this previously, because that's what academics do. we like to summarize before we kick off with a new idea. So we looked at last time out at the question of, should we look at student teachers as stakeholders, genuine stakeholders in terms of their involvement in initial teacher education programs and courses. Now, it may seem a strange question to start with, but the assumption that I've always held is that yes, we should. that we should involve our students from day one. But not everybody is in that same space. And it led to some very interesting conversations when we met as a group back last summer, and therefore we decided we should chase this down a little bit more, make a bit more sense of it. So to open the conversation last time out, we got a couple of our own student teachers to put their perspective to us in a very short video. And that is still on our site. People who wanted to have a look at that, you're welcome to go back and have a look at the links to that from the forum space last time out. It was Seamus and Roxanne particularly. They argued very passionately that the student voice was important. What they were not so clear about, perhaps, was how we incorporate it. And then Peter came on board with his suggestions in relation to student as a university customer, as a professional, and the requirements around developing in those spaces that we might overlook unless we think of students as genuine participants in all of the various elements of designing and running a program. So it's easy enough to talk about participants and bringing student voices together, and we're very much in agreement on the single idea that it can result in better quality courses. There was no doubt at all in our minds after the conversation last time out that we get better outcomes for our students, and it gives the students themselves a very strong sense of involvement, a sense of belonging to and being important within the program, and also of managing their own learning progress. Now, Dorothy has put up the link very kindly to the previous video, and it's there for anyone who wants to have a look at it as the session goes on. As you're aware, the ITE Lab itself is very much about, it's a project that's very much about establishing ways and means of bringing student teachers into the frame, offering slightly different, hopefully innovative approaches in relation to all of that. And that's what's driving a lot of what we're trying to do within the project itself. So the framing question, if you like, for today's discussion grows quite logically and naturally out of the previous one. If we're in agreement that it's a good idea to bring our student teachers in, then how do we do so? What are the ways that we should look at in terms of bringing the student voice in, and particularly in terms of bringing the student voice in early and bringing it in often? So that's our focus, if you like, for today's session. We thought we'd start in a similar way to the last time with a short video clip. Now, this one is slightly different. Last time out, we heard the voice of student teachers speaking about the student-teacher experience. To the mix was then added the idea of the student as a consumer, the student as a customer in a service economy. Here's another way of thinking about it. Here's a third, if you like, strand, a third approach. In this short video, which runs for about 5 minutes, and I hope it runs okay, Dorothy, we didn't unfortunately get a chance to fully test it. But basically, it's a video that looks about engaging learners in their own learning, but from the perspective of that learning being a community. The concept of a group of learners coming together in relation to teaching and learning and treating themselves as a community. So think of it kind of like this. If each of our courses is a community of learners and teachers, then is there something in this video that might help us get a better sense of how we can effectively bring voice in more often and more frequently from a community perspective? So Dorothy, if you can try the pod there now, we'll see what actually comes up, and we'll do a sound test on it and so on.
Okay, I'm hoping that this is going to work, Connor, if you can let me know.
Yeah, I can see it quite clearly, and I can hear it quite clearly.
Many of us have ideas on how to improve things in our everyday groups.
We don't often find ways to vocalise these ideas with others and explore how they might be turned into action.
Engagement often consists of time spent filling in questionnaires and surveys, but most of the time leaving nowhere.
Too many organisations do not recognise that engaging with their members is critical for their success. Consequently, these organisations miss out on an opportunity to tap into the wealth of knowledge and wisdom In turn, their members and partners feel less engaged, and many learning opportunities can be lost.
I'm Dr. Dave Elliott. I'm the Director of Marketing Skills and Development. A great job that means I have the opportunity to look at how the college should be developing and what innovation we should be looking at to make the college more efficient. When we discovered Vocalize, we knew we wanted something that was new and exciting. Vocalize has allowed us to capture student opinion in a way that we've never been able to do before, in an efficient and effective way.
I'm Asking Thomas, the Director of Learner Services within the college. Through the work of ESTO, the Welsh Assembly Government, and NUS Wales, Learner Voice has been placed at the very heart of capturing students' views within the colleges. Vocalize now has a part to play in ensuring that we can capture our learner voice throughout the learner journey. Since the college has implemented Vocalize, we have already had over 10,000 interactions. Vocalize has provided an opportunity for the college to take learner voice into a new era. It has provided for us a means of enhancing an already excellent profile. It has enabled us to go forward, and it will for the future ensure that we have a means of communicating with our learners, engaging and implementing change.
I'm Gareth Bromhall, I'm chair of the Learner Voice Committee. There's never really been an effective way for students' views to be brought to the committee, and students largely feel that their views are being ignored. The Vocalize system is really empowering students. Their ideas are being put into action. It shows that their opinions and their views actually count.
And the material here currently is really underused, and that it can be turned into an eco-garden so that the students can use it more effectively. I suggested the idea for Learner Voice, and the other students rated it highly, and now it's being put through into action. So now I'm part of a working group that we're transforming this courtyard area.
Students are able to engage via the widget on the college intranet, via any laptop in the building, or even using their own smartphones. We also hold group voting sessions in the atrium.
The Vocalize system has revolutionised the way that we interact with our students. It's really changed and brought alive our learner voice process. We've been really interested in the ideas that the students have put forward, and we're very excited about making some of those ideas happen. And we've also pushed it forward to our staff. We've been delighted with the response. Those in authority can effectively hear the voice of those they represent and respond quickly and decisively. Using Vocalize can enhance your decision making in your organisation.
Thanks, Dorothy. That's really good. Apologies, colleagues. The sound was a teeny bit iffy there, but I think it was clear enough to give us a sense of what Vocalize is, how it works, and what the kind of potential of it might be, if you like. So, in summary, what we saw was an institution that's gone systematically into the process of changing the way that learners in the institution, not just in one course, but in all of the courses that they actually provide, are able to make suggestions very directly to the people who are in a position to make these suggestions turn into real activities, real actions on the ground. And there's a number of little ideas that sort of caught my mind the few times I've watched this video. The first one was, in one sense, it doesn't matter that it's a particular app. It's the idea behind the application that I think is more important. And I'll be interested, Peter, to hear what you have to say about this in a minute or two. But the concept of giving the students a very simple, straightforward way of bringing their issues directly to the management, directly to the course leaders, of doing so in a way that enhances their profile and their confidence, that allows them to work through the learner voice committee if they choose to do so, or to interact on an individual level if they choose to take that particular route. The whole point being that they can put their opinions and their ideas directly to those who are in a position to respond and make things happen. And we saw one or two nice examples of it, for example, the work on the courtyard and so on. So the basic principle behind the apps is that it's like a voting kind of application. Ideas are put up, students comment, support them, challenge them, and so on. Staff sit in on all of this as part of the genuine part of the community, not in a monitoring way, but in a participatory way. And I found that really, really interesting in a lot of regards. So we had the closing comment then from Jane Davison, who's the director of the institution, where she talked about it being a really good way for ideas to be put forward effectively so that the learner voice is captured and can be responded to effectively. So that's, in many senses, what's going on there. Peter, what's your initial sort of reaction to the whole idea of running learning in and through a community and using an app on this magnitude, if you like, to support that? Does it chime with you, or do you have concerns?
No, I think what we see here is very similar to the way that we actually gain information from the people in our market, whether they be internal, external customers, potential customers. So I think the app is very interesting and certainly on my list to follow up and have a little look at after the session as well. So I think there's learning both ways here potentially.
Yeah, what struck me was and again, it wasn't meant to be sort of product placement as such. I was more interested in the ideas and the process than the app itself, but I did find it quite interesting that it became such a fundamental part of decision making within the institution so quickly. Now, I did a quick pop, like you do when something like this comes to your attention. I did a little bit of digging around, and there are many similar applications. It's not the only one. It's used as a knowledge building tool, but this is unique because it was customized for use in the Leicester and the Pembroke College situation. So I just thought that was interesting in and of itself. Any other thoughts? Any other comments? Colleagues, you're very, very welcome to make them in the chat line. We are watching the chat line as it goes along, so I'd be interested to see whether you find this interesting, whether you find it intriguing, whether you find it possibly more of a problem, can you see any difficulties with it, and so on. So please feel free to make your comments and observations in the chat line. I see Massimo coming in there very quickly, saying it's rather nice. Yes, I would agree.
Sorry, I was just going to say,
Peter, sorry.
I think it does emphasise that it has to be bought. This whole process has to come from the very senior management within the university or college, and that is a critical piece of making this work, that it's at all levels from the very top down.
Agreed, but then that raises one very interesting challenge. How do you get students to accept and to buy into something that comes from the very top? In my institution, that's very much a recipe for pushback. Any thoughts on that?
I think there has to be, what I see when we use similar approaches is there has to be a feedback loop that shows that what is fed in is benefiting that person in the end, that information is being taken on board and doesn't disappear into some folder never to be seen again. So I think...
Yeah, I would agree. And there's a nice
slight delay on the line from...
Yeah, I was going... Not a problem. We can be patient with each other, I'm sure. I see a comment from Maria Castro in the chat line there, where she mentions that it's interesting, but there may be technical issues. Very often the best of ideas run up against technical problems and technical issues. Now, in this particular case, they seem to have solved that pretty quickly. There were some teething problems, as it was described by the chairman of the Learner Voice Committee, but that once they got it working, it was in everyone's interest to actually keep it going. And what you're saying there about, what you were saying there, Peter, just before I cut across you, about the idea that it's a cultural thing, I think is important also.
Yeah, and it probably takes a little time to change the culture within an institution, within a university. And I think certainly, having it in a form of this sort of app would make it much easier for that instant feedback to occur than maybe other older type approaches to gain feedback.
Yeah, absolutely. That's one thing that they were all in agreement on, the immediacy of it, the fact that it was going into the conversation and not, as you described it, not into a folder somewhere to be acted on in some future point in time. It was very much something that was seen as part and parcel of what they did. The way that it was managed was through the Learner Voice Committee, interestingly. So the ownership of this rests with the institution, but the day-to-day running of it rested with Gareth and his team in terms of the voice committee. And I found that quite interesting as well, because it goes some way. Vesna has made a very interesting comment there in the chat line also. She mentions that the feedback needs to be acted upon in order to gain the trust and the ongoing engagement by the students. And that's exactly what they found. How you maintain that, of course, is the real challenge. Students will give things a try, but will they stay with it? I don't know. And there's a very interesting comment coming in there from Alicia as well. She says, Peter, you can see it there. Do you want to take it?
Yeah, no, I think the whole change management and change management of culture just takes, it's a long journey where you may go down some wrong routes and have to reroute your journey to get to the end point. But I think this instant giving the feedback as you go is the critical thing. People realizing that they are being listened to.
Yeah. Alicia, if you have a mic handy, do you want to come in on that and sort of expand your point a little bit further, particularly what you mean in terms of the formulaic, the problem of the formulaic? Would you like to take that a little further? I'm interested in it personally. Hi.
Institutions
Yes, clearly. Yes.
Maybe
Yes.
more open-minded, if I can use this kind of terms. I'm thinking about the issue with Italian institutions, especially Italian university. And with formulaic, I mean, sometimes universities are very rigid in their structure and they're not really willing to change, especially for what concern student feedback. I mean, we have system of student feedback, but if I can be honest, they're not effective at all. I mean, students are always passive in a sense. They're not really given a real voice. They're just asked to rate lessons, but in not a very open way. So they have been asked to have an opinion, but it's a very flat one. While I think they need to be given a real feedback and to give feedback to people who teach them, but it's going to be a real feedback and not just rating like from 1 to 5, what do you think of the lesson? Which is, to me, sorry, it's a bit like, well, we should be going over this now. We should be like engaging in dialogue with our student teachers because they're going to be the future teachers. And while we expect from them to be open to give feedback and receive feedback, we as an institution are not ready to step in and say, okay, let's try to have a dialogue in a kind of horizontal way where you don't feel threatened if you say something that doesn't really align with what I expect. I don't know if my point is clear, but it's a bit, I think giving student feedback is very important. I saw that on Tuesday with Module A and Module B students, and every time they give feedback and they're given feedback of what to do, they engage and engage and engage and strive to improve. But this is, as I said the last time, is a very privileged situation of being part of ITE Lab. While when you step outside our ITE Lab classroom, you go back to a very narrow kind of system. This is my opinion. Maybe it's a bit, a bit off.
No. I mean, I think it's very, I think it's very reasonable. I don't have any reason to think that what you're saying doesn't apply in an interestingly large number of other institutions. While we were speaking that time, and I'm not going to let that go just yet. I want to come back to what you said there particularly, because the tone running through what you're saying is very much about the power and the value of a particular type of feedback, and it's placed chronologically at a certain stage of the programming and course work. We're going to look at that in a moment, so don't let that thought slip away from you. But there was a very, very interesting comment put in there by I think it was Roger just a second ago in the chat line, where he talks about, he raised a very interesting question. Roger, do you want to come in and float that question, or would you rather we just
elaborate if it helps,
take it on?
I may be off being in these comments, but he raises the question really.
Please, yes.
What is the nature of the student in initial teacher education? Are they being prepared for a profession, in which case kind of professional standards apply, and to what extent should they be treated as professionals with professional views and opinions and validity of their views, or to what extent are they apprentices, in a way, apprentice teachers? On the other hand, to what extent are they still young people, almost fresh from school, who are entering adulthood and require some kind of hand-holding as they become professionals? There's a danger of being patronizing in that approach of learner involvement, and there's a danger of being over-optimistic, perhaps, in thinking they're already professionals, if that makes sense.
It makes a lot of sense to me. I'm hearing a dilemma that I struggle with, quite frequently in my own context and situation, and it speaks nicely to the video we've just looked at as well, because in a sense the question you're asking is, should we have different expectations with regard to initial teacher education than perhaps we should have in relation to a further education type or college type, lower college type structure, as in lower in terms of age group, college type structure for something like the Pembroke or the Leicester colleges? And I think you're on to something important there. And I'd be very interested to hear what colleagues would have to say about that. Peter, would you see a major difference between the way you would go about engaging learners in the slightly younger, slightly less confident type learner that you might get in a further education, or in the early stages perhaps of initial teacher education, as to those who are slightly more experienced or slightly further along in their training? Would you see an argument for treating them differently in terms of voice, or do you think it's all the same? I'm curious.
I think if I reflect
what
on
your
it,
position would be there.
The younger students, for want of a better description, or the people at, say, the Pembroke College, will have they will have come out of a very structured education system. When I talk about primary school, secondary school, and therefore they may not be able or have the skills yet to give some of that feedback compared to potentially students who've been through maybe 1 or 2 years at university or polytechnic or further education, higher education, where they may have developed some more of those skills, those soft skills, whatever we want to call them, that will allow them to give better feedback and be more open and honest with their feedback. So I think there is potentially a difference there.
Yeah, that's interesting. And in a sense, this might be a good moment to go across to Ellie Marie and ask her for her thoughts and comments, because Ellie Marie is struggling with the same issue, but specifically in relation to a teacher education group. So, Ellie Marie, do you want to come in at this point and give us your observations in relation to what you've been doing in AGDR in
really
connection with student voice, learner voice, and how you're bringing it into the frame?
To be able to have student voice is a kind of acquiring some skills. So when you have fresh students, as you mentioned, they come fresh from a very closed environment at school and then come to university and have some other expectations, and maybe feel insecure and want everything to be like it was when they went to school. And that kind of student voice is very different from a student voice from a more mature student that has been that has a couple of years of experience at the university and will be able to see other kinds of or give other feedback into it could be course planning or design or things that they feel they lack. So I think that students have to learn or they have to take them into account from the beginning and try to teach them how to reflect on and what things they should reflect on. And on the other side, we have to be we have to take them and give them feedback on their evaluations also. Like some of you mentioned earlier, that if they give us some feedback and we don't do anything with them with the feedback, then the student voice they feel, or the students feel, that they don't come along with their feedback. So it's important to take the feedback into account and invite, as we discussed with the student teacher here, it's very important to invite the students to reflect, but also to kind of teach them how to reflect on yes. I think I lost your voice, or you hear me? Yeah. Yeah. Yes.
I can hear you clearly. Can you hear us? Okay. I'm not sure hearing my voice is a great way to kind of conclude an argument. But can Vesna, I know that you're listening in there also. Just before we leave this particular concept, the student voice pulled through, and the ideas that Ellie Marie has sort of talked a little bit to there, would you like to come in from the perspective of Iris and how you see the voice feeding in, the possibilities for communicating, the possibilities for building on the voice as part of the learning process? Not putting you on the spot now, but if you're happy enough to do so, I'd very much appreciate your comments.
Perspective for us is our relationship
Clearly, yes.
with our customers who are educational institutions, and observing the relationship within those institutions between the students and the leaders, be it at primary, secondary, or university level. And just from our perspective, in terms of engagement of the students in their professional learning, when that sort of culture exists, with the leaders being very much aware and in favor of engagement with the students, it really does pay dividends for everybody involved, because we're talking about empowerment and accountability and engagement, which results with better outcomes for everybody. So the way that we do it from our perspective is always ask for feedback from all of the levels, and we make sure that this is where what I was getting to before. I think in whatever situation, when you ask for feedback, if there is no if you don't act on it in whatever way, even if it is explaining why at some point, at that particular point, it's not possible maybe to do what is suggested, but to acknowledge it and to definitely work with it. So we continue, for example, to develop our platform and our relationships on the basis of the feedback. We're very transparent about it, but also in terms of the actual educational institutions, where there is that sort of collaboration and genuine involvement and listening to the voice of the students or the teachers, it makes a whole lot of a difference.
I mean, that's very, very useful. Thank you indeed, Vesna. That sort of, in a sense, brings together a lot of the thinking and the comments we've been making in particular in relation to that space. Roger's point about the danger of being patronizing is still rattling round in, if you like, in the back of my head. And I'm just curious as to what colleagues feel about that particular idea. Sorry, this is slipping a little bit here from me. As to what colleagues feel about that. Now, what I'd like to do is kind of raise what seems to me, this is really, I'm sorry, Dorothy, I have no idea what's happening here. It stopped. Okay. No, I was leaning on, I must have been leaning on the keypad or something. I wanted to go to this particular slide here because, again, it's something that it might seem a little bit patronizing in terms of where it's coming from. This is a slide that I've literally lifted directly out of a very recent publication by the National Curriculum Council here in Ireland. Now, they have no remit in relation to higher education or teacher education or anything like that. So their area of interest and focus is very much on the learner voice as the learner is perceived and seen as a school-going child, somebody under the age of 18. Nevertheless, I did find this an interesting model. They've published this model, which is based on a number of different academics' work in the space, and at the risk of doing it a little bit of an injustice or a bit of damage, it sort of divides into 4 corners and 2 halves. Now, the comment in the center relating to Article 12 relates to the convention, the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child. And basically that is subdivided into 2 concepts, or 2 parts, if you like. The right to express views and the right to have those views given due weight. So in other words, not just saying them and having them ignored, parceled away, packaged away, or whatever. And within the concept of how do we offer students the right to express their views, the document deals at 2 levels. It raises the question of what is the voice and when should we be hearing it? When should we be looking for comment and input? And what sort of spaces, and I'm going to focus on this one for a moment, what sort of spaces should we be providing to learners so that they can actually exercise their voice in a legitimate way? Now, we've seen one example earlier, in the sense that the Vocalize app is a space. It's almost like a digital space. It allows you to raise your voice in a number of ways, and at a number of points in the cycle. And that's really what intrigues me at this stage. So the concept of the space in which we express student voice, or encourage the expression of student voice, and the way we pursue that voice, the kind of time frame, if you like. Is there a perfect time, or is there a necessity to speak to students all the time? Is it something you do at the end of the course? Which brings me back to Alicia's comments about feedback. Because very much in the academic world, when we do feedback, it tends to be towards the end of a learning experience. This is what we did. Here is how you did. There's your feedback. So that's a concept of voice, but there are other voices. There are other ways that a voice can be used, maybe early in the conversation to start stating preferences and options and needs, and so on. So that's where I'd like to go to Peter for a few minutes in terms of that concept of space and voice, because I think what you've been doing in terms of SMART, Peter, is quite interesting in that regard. So I'm just putting up the slide, and maybe you'd like to talk us through a little bit of what's involved there with this concept of space and voice in the background. Peter.
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Have we lost Peter?
Sorry, can you hear me okay?
Hello? Oh, sorry, Peter. Okay, yeah, I can hear you clearly now. I was just saying that.
Yeah, I was going to say, can you just move the slide down slightly?
Yes, clearly.
Thank you.
Hello.
And hopefully you can hear me. This is just a very high-level summary of what we call voice of the customer, which could equally be voice of the student. And we look for every opportunity to gain feedback and to listen. So maybe the app we talked about at the beginning is one opportunity, but we look at every source, every geography, all our customers, and that's internal and external customers. And then we actually spend a lot of time analysing, and then we actually act, and that's at all levels throughout the business, whether it's the executive management, account management, team leaders, product managers. So that's trying to summarise a little bit. And if you just move down to the slide underneath, this gives you an idea of some of the ways that we listen. I think the Voice of the Customer survey, which is the first one, Net Promoter Scores is something that is very commonly used in industry. So this, in essence, is a standard that all companies compare themselves against. I'm not sure if such a standard exists in universities or the world of academia, but within that, you may well all have seen the questions when you get asked, please rate on a scale of 1 to 10. That is often a company using the Net Promoter Score approach. And unless you rate a company at 9 or 10, you are either a detractor or you are passive. So companies are interested in how many people are rating them at the very top end. So if we were talking about students and we had a 1 to 10 scale, where would they be rating the lessons or the MOOC or the work that they're doing in university? And if it wasn't at the top end, that would score low. And we track Net Promoter Scores from our customers. And in fact, the next call I go into today is our town hall meeting, where we will go through how we are tracking month on month and rolling years in terms of Net Promoter Scores. We also have in here, our channel who sell our product. We track their feedback. We also track, as you can see, surveys that we send out. We do online surveys, and we're tracking customers on the website. And if you think about, you know, a university, a teacher training, there are maybe other areas that you could be looking to track. You know, tracking the feedback on the MOOC might be different to the net promoter score within a university. So I guess at a very high level, this maybe just gives you an idea of how important that customer is. And this is the one thing, next to our sales figures for the month and quarter, this will be the second thing on the agenda this afternoon, because this is really critical to us as to how we are tracking. And then within industry, for our technology of education technology, there will be an industry line of this is the level that, you know, your competitors are at, and we will be tracking if we're below or, you know, above or below. And if that's deviated, what is going on? What are the factors? And it will then be dug back down through all of these different mechanisms to actually understand, even down to, it's a school in Dublin who bought some product and they haven't been able to use it because it wasn't installed properly. We will dig down to that minute detail, and that will even be discussed at all levels from executive down. So I don't know if that gives you a flavour of how important this is. And maybe that's my message and thought.
Yeah, I find that fascinating, Peter, because again, we have similar conversations, but the language that we use in institutions is different. For example, we wouldn't talk about gathering net promoter scores. We'd be looking at course evaluations and feedback from student participants in various courses. And that's pretty much standard across an awful lot of universities and colleges currently. I'm not saying it's welcomed, because there are a number of kind of issues that this raises about who owns this material, who owns the information. Is it going to be used to manage and drive change, or is it going to be made available to course lecturers to if you like, self-monitor and self-regulate? So there are a series of very big questions running through the use of metrics like this in university contexts and settings, even in relation to teacher education. But it's an interesting concept, and it's certainly something that I think we will be engaging with a lot more over time and space. And I think we've had an opportunity to do some of that in connection with the ITE lab spaces particularly. So what I like about the picture that's currently on the screen is the way that there's a sort of a sequence to the events. You know, you have particular points where certain things happen. That's a little bit alien, I think, to a lot of our thinking in higher education. We tend to be, as Alicia said earlier, we tend to be very much retro. We do all of this, but we do it at the end rather than sooner. And that's quite interesting there, because it would seem to me from what you're suggesting that it's better to start earlier and to work more systematically as time passes, rather than try to fix things at the end. Or am I missing something very obvious there?
It's about instantly addressing issues that are happening. If we have a particular problem with a product, we need to know instantly, not in 12 months or at the end of the course. We have to know immediately to put it right. So it is, and it's about being proactive, not reactive. So if we see any trend occurring with with something, whatever it is, that is jumped on immediately and addressed. And I think it's that proactivity rather than reactivity.
Yeah.
Indeed. Thank you. Yes, I just
Yeah,
wanted
yeah.
to
Vesna, did you? I
pull
see a hand
on
up there
to
in
an element
the
that
line. Did you
Peter is
want to come
putting
in on
forward,
this?
and which actually links a little bit with the
Please
notion
do.
of looking at your students as your customers. And I think that there are lessons here that we can learn, or we can at least
Yeah.
consider and reflect on. So what Peter was talking about is very much relevant and the case of any organization who is dealing with customers. And I wanted to add also the element of development, not just reacting to what is already put out there as products in whatever context we're talking about, but in terms of product development. And this is what we do, for example, as a smaller company. Of course, I know that we are on a very different size from Smart, but we gather feedback and suggestions in both structured and anecdotal way. And it's very important to consider that, but it's also, I think, important to know that sometimes our customers don't know what they actually need. They may think that they want something, but this is where I think it's important to engage in a proper, in-depth dialogue, because often we've been in a situation when certain features are, for example, asked for or suggested. And when we dig deep into the reason behind it or how they're going to use, we've been able to either point out on existing features that can fulfill that need, or indeed to put it to bed because it really wouldn't help with what they're trying to achieve. So I think for me the key to this is an ongoing dialogue and trust and collaboration really as the key in order to fulfill the needs of the customers.
Yeah, thanks very much indeed for that. And Ellie Marie, did you, in terms of maybe a slightly more academic world response to that, would you like to come in and follow up on the comments from Peter and Vesna in relation to this concept of building trust and so on?
Vesna said that not always the customers know.
Particularly, you have some comments from your students, I believe,
or what they
which
need,
might be useful.
And that's something that that I have experienced. That students will say, come with some points of view and desires and comments because they that I can't follow up because I know that that's not what they really need or what they really and then they come back afterwards some time after and they have realized that yes, it wasn't that what they thought they needed what they got. So sometimes they can reflect back and say that yes, you're right at some point. If so I think the dialogue is very important, and I think we learned a lot of that with the workshop, the ITE Lab workshop in Brussels, a very good way for the dialogue. So then, because then it's possible to talk about it. If we just receive comments like the application we saw from earlier today or something, we don't have the same possibility for a dialogue. So I think, yes, we have to listen.
I think.
But the dialogue is also very important.
Yeah.
I was going to, thank you, I was going to just add that what you just said,
Peter.
Ely, is true in our world as well, that often customers think they want something or they need something, but they don't. And when they do reflect and we talk to them, I think this is where the dialogue and the two-way dialogue is something interesting that you mentioned and is something we pursue as well. When you do start to have a deeper conversation, they do often realise that they don't really need, you know, the green little button or the yellow button or whatever, because that was something they thought they needed, but when they really look and understand more deeply the solution, that actually isn't what they're really after. So I think what you've just said fits totally into our world as well.
Yeah, I've got that strong sense also from my own experience down the years that sometimes students come to you with unreasonable, not in a bad sense, but you know they have certain expectations, certain hopes, which are to their way of analyzing the context and situation they're in absolutely crucial now. But it's not always that you can put the time, energy, and effort into. And that sometimes what you have to do is step back and look at it slightly differently. And I was fascinated by, again, this is something that Vesna drew my attention to quite recently, when we were looking at models of analyzing video activities. And I noticed that there's a pattern, a similar pattern there to, it's to do with perception, it's to do with immediate perception of the situation and the context and immediate needs. And then a slightly deeper and richer second run through that. And it's perhaps in relation to that that we can, as educators, as people working in these spaces, and as colleagues in the industry world, that we can actually add the most value to the student voice. And I'm glad also that, Ellie-Marie, that you brought up the design workshop, because again, it's a nice slide. It shows us all at our best in many ways, working away in the context of the Future Learning Lab in Brussels. But really, when I looked at what's going on there, it really is a lived version of this diagram in so many ways. There's a physical space, and there's an openness, an intellectual space, a willingness to engage with students. So at the bottom of the slide, it says children must be given a safe space and so on. If you take out children, I think you can legitimately put in education students who are preparing to be teachers, can be given an encouraging, a positive space that allows them to form and express views. So very much the concept we had in relation to ITE Lab and the formation of the modules and the formation of the MOOC materials reflects that concept. Then there's the idea of giving true voice, that they must be facilitated. You have to find a way of getting those conversations going. And again, I think we did a reasonable enough job of that in relation to the ITE Lab. Not perfect. We still have lots to learn. And we have to find ways of continuing that voice into the time beyond the project, if you like. Partly that, I think, will be our Facebook page. Partly it might be other offerings where we extend MOOCs and modules out into other domains that build out in an open source way from what we're doing currently. The concept then of influence, that you really have to feel that what you're saying is being taken seriously. And I don't think we can be faulted for that in any way in relation to what we're trying to do within ITE Lab. And in many ways, I think we offer some very good examples of how that can be done. And we continue to offer those examples, not just in the workshop space. And then the concept of audience, that the views must be taken on board and must be listened to, and that there's more than one point in time where you access the views of the learner. So I think that that's probably, Dorothy, if in terms of summarizing, I think that's probably where we could go across to any comments or observations. Thank you, Alicia. Or further points that people want to make from within the stream, the chat line. Does anyone want to kind of come in with some questions, comments, or thoughts there in terms of following up anything that we've talked about so far?
I think it's
we just put up a little open forum slide.
Sorry, it's Peter here. The only other thing
I'm watching the live.
The other thing I'd say is that students are also listening to some of this feedback, and they are also potentially going to act on feedback they see being provided. And I'm thinking of the the way in England we have gold, silver, and I think it's bronze Teaching Excellent Framework awards to universities. Certainly, looking at my own lad and his friends when they're choosing universities, they pay a lot of attention to the actual university, not just the course, but that TEF award. Now, I'm not sure if that's familiar to everybody on the call, but that sort of award that schools get is certainly being listened to by the students and the potential new student teachers as well.
That's a fascinating point. Again, it's not something that colleagues would have had experience of. We don't, for example, have a TEF here in Ireland, and there's no real indications on the horizon that we're likely to go that particular route. But again, it reflects our teaching and our learning cultures, perhaps. Some slight differences. It's possible to know these things informally in a small country like Ireland. In ways that it might not be possible in, for example, a larger context like the UK, where it can be and perhaps is being made more formal and more public and more visible in that regard. Everybody knows, in a sense, not just the courses, but also the quality of teaching in our institutions in Ireland. And you know the better ones from the less effective ones, pretty much without kind of going to too much digging and delving. There's an incredible network of young learners out there who support and work with each other on this kind of area. But it is still a very interesting idea, Peter, and I'm wondering if it might catch on in other places as well. Are we too unprepared to engage with this kind of thing in universities, or is it sort of something that we should be watching out for in future terms? I'm not terribly sure just yet. There's a comment there that's just come in from Roger about Ellie Marie's point about meta language is important, ideally developed in school, the lifelong learning habit, the ability to reflect on your learning and then to articulate that and so on. Yeah, I don't think you could put it much better than that, Roger. It's very true and very much part of what most of us try to do. But I think both in the industry context and also in the educational context, it's that way of engaging with people and hoping that they develop and self-develop as they go through. And the concept of self-regulated learning is perhaps something that we probably need to spend a little bit more time on. Peter, did you want to have a final word before we move to the closing section? Or is there anyone else who wants to raise a point or bring an issue forward before I hand back to Dorothy, who closes out the session today?
The only other reflection that's gone through my mind listening to Marie was also maybe the peer-to-peer sort of conversations that might be going on, and the importance of those as well in terms of providing feedback. The actual work that how students are talking and feeding back to each other.
Yeah. Yeah. And in a sense, we saw a nice example of that where they were feeding forward. In the app that we started the talk with today, when we were looking at the Visualize, a lot of it was conversations that groups of students were having, saying, we would like to have, we would like to see, we would like to do. So it's instead of feeding back on the course, it's feeding forward into the physical provision and also into the content provision in relation to the course. But it's a very interesting idea that we perhaps don't give enough time and thought to the concept of peer engagement in educational settings and contexts. I certainly take that as a learning point. Dorothy, I think we're kind of up against the hour and a little bit beyond it. So, do you want to take back the reins at this stage and close us out, please, for the session? Before you do so, can I thank Peter again for stepping in, and also to Vesna, obviously, and Alicia, and the voices that we've heard. It's always nice to hear voices other than your own, I think. So that's all yours at this stage. I'm going to drop the camera, but
well,
thank you again,
I just echo Connor's thank you to the panel, Peter Claxton at SMART, Dr. Conor Galvin at University College Dublin, and Ellie Marie at the University of Agder. So this is just closing off. This is part of our monthly webinars that we hold on a series of themes. Down on the slide there, you'll see our 2019 programme. We are always interested in hearing from anyone that'd like to be a guest speaker, participant on the panel. If you are interested, please email us. Our next one, given where Easter falls, is at the end of April and the holiday season, etc. Our next one is going to be in May, and we will be looking at designing of teaching resources, including the soft skills with inclusive aims. And we'll be joined definitely by, I hope, our colleagues from University of Perugia on that, and University of Newcastle, and also a couple of our industry partners sharing the experience of this within the project itself. So then we have, just to join, finalise, in June, we are holding jointly with the Future Classroom Lab in Brussels, Schools Innovation Forum at Future Classroom Lab in Brussels. This is going to be a face-to-face meeting to which any associate partner is most welcome to join in Brussels. You do, though, have to self-fund to get yourself there, your travel, and find somewhere to stay. But the invitation is open to all partners and associate partners and universities. And I will share details of that with the wrap-up. The dates for that are June 20th and 21st. So that's the end of our forum for discussion on the second part of Hearing the Learner. Again, thank you very much. I will stop the recording now, and I'll stay online for a minute or two with any questions. Otherwise, I'd just like to thank everyone for your participation today, and I'll stop the recording now.